Hiya, and welcome to another very exciting video on this channel. Today I want to get into a little known undervalued tool that has proven very useful in helping me improve my productivity. Those who know my story know that when I first got into the industry, I heard all these horror stories about artists getting screwed and things like that, so I figured I had to come up with something to protect myself, something to keep track of my work, so that I knew what was owed to me based on the work that I produced. And so just to break the suspense so that you're not all waiting at the edge of your seat to find out what this magical tool is, the logbook. Before we get into it, maybe a little word. When you're first starting out in the industry, your priority should probably be improving your work. Basically understanding the standard that you should be hitting for your project and reaching for that. And once you start getting a little bit of experience, you have a better idea of how to get there. And once you know how to get there, then you can find little things to tweak and basically speed things up. But the first thing people should probably focus on is the quality of the work. Employees tend to be a little more flexible with the volume that you can produce if the product is good. I actually remember having a bit of a chat with my boss at the time.
Paul, damn! Your work sucks. Quit sucking at your work.
Yes, sir.
I don't know that that was very helpful for you. But, with time I came to better understand what my supervisor and the director were looking for. And so my work got better, and eventually I was able to hit that standard. I remember the chat I had with my boss at that time.
Paul, congratulations. Your work is passable. Now make more.
You got it.
Yeah, so basically my work was getting there. I was just having a little bit of trouble hitting quota. There's a book I was reading at the time on the topic of leadership. One of the things they said that came up again and again was what is measured can be improved. And so the first thing you kind of need to do before you can improve things is to find a metric to follow and measure progress, to measure where you're starting at. And then as you try things out, you see how things get affected. So with that being said, let's hop onto my computer and I'll show you a little bit about how I approach this. All right, so first off, before I get into it, I personally prefer to have a physical notebook like I brought up earlier. You could probably do something very similar in a spreadsheet or something. I just prefer the paper and pen format, and you might see why as I start to draw things out here. Now, if you're interested in doing this kind of thing, I'd strongly recommend getting an app to track the hours that you work. I use an app called Timesheet or something like that. It's just to have accurate data that you can work with to really figure out what your hours are worth, how much work you're putting out, how productive you are. So the first thing I do when I start on a new episode is I set up some dates. Right, so I got a date range for a work week, and then I'll write out the days. So I like my work weeks to start on Mondays. Weekends, ideally, you wouldn't work any hours on those days, but every now and then it does happen. And personally, I prefer the weekends to be an extension of the work week rather than the beginning of a new one. More often than not, if we're working extra hours, we're trying to finish the work from the week we were on rather than trying to get ahead on the next week. Now, using the app, tracking your hours at the end of every day, you would write these down. And keep in mind that this is for yourself. There's no point in trying to cheat for the numbers to look better. If you want an accurate representation of your productivity, you need the numbers to be accurate. So don't cheat yourself, write the actual numbers that you track. When I track my work hours, it's strictly the work hours. So lunch breaks are taken out. Any breaks I take through the day, if it's anything more than 10 or 15 minutes, I tend to subtract it from the hours that I'm tracking. Idle time does not qualify as work hours. Right, so every week, track your hours. And then what I like to do, because I got the week range written here, what I'll do is in parentheses, I'll put the total hours So in this case, 35. Sorry if this looks like it faded suddenly. I just realized that I was writing on 2 layers at the same time. Now to track the actual work. Every show has a code. In this case, I'll just write show, and then I'll write the episode number after that. However you want to identify that, it kind of comes in handy because not every show is the same. Some shows are more difficult than others, and in the long run, when you're looking back at the data, it helps to know what you were on to better understand the numbers behind them. So I got the episode number written out. I'll write the due date for that episode, and then PA. Next up, we identify the scene numbers. I'm kind of roughly transferring over some data from an actual episode that I worked on. All right, so once I have the scene numbers down, what I've been assigned, then next to those numbers, give myself a little space here, you'll see why. I write the frame count for each scene. And at the bottom, I like to note the total amount of scenes that I have and the total frames for the sequence. Now, as I analyze a scene, I like to make myself some notes. Anything that's important, things that I know might slow me down. If it's just a normal scene, then it's not a big deal. But say I know there's a rig swap. I know that'll take a little more time. Some scenes might have more characters. So I might say like, okay, this one has 4 characters as opposed to just 1 or 2. And then same thing. I had a show where they had what we called special poses. These were special rigs or special costumes for a very specific gag that was designed. So I would note that. If a show's behind schedule and they want us to prioritize scenes for like effects or something, I might do like a little star and say, okay, this one's an effects heavy scene. So, try to focus on that first. So anything that's worthy of note, I'll write beside those scenes. And then what I'll identify is shots that are reused, right? So a lot of the setups are reused. In this case, we'll say those scenes, and they're all the same setup, or even just identifying things that need to hook up. And then as setups are identified as being reused, then I'll also write the total amount of frames for those setups. Because typically it's faster to take on different setups at the same time. As I said in my previous video, don't feel like you need to tackle scenes chronologically or in the order that they come in. I found it to be more effective to take on clusters of scenes that use the same setup rather than trying to do things in order. Now, one thing I will do sometimes, like we have this first setup here, adding up to 226 frames. Some things I will do sometimes is just do the first scene, submit it, and see what kind of notes I get back, see how the supervisor likes the staging and the general posing. And then once I get notes for that, if there are little tweaks, then I'll apply those and see how it goes with the second scene in this group. Often once I apply those notes to another scene in a group, that tends to get approved, and then I can go back and I know it works for the first scene and I fix it there. And then the PA, this is posing an animation. These are the dates where I submit them the first time. I don't bother tracking the different iterations because revisions take a lot less time than the first time I post something. So let's say on the first day I got these scenes done, and then second day I did that and that. Third day I might have done this. So my posing was all submitted by the end of Wednesday. So then animation might look something like, I might get this done on the 23rd. Let's say I only managed to do that on the 24th. Let's say I got something happened and something needed to be reassigned. In that case, I'll just write RA where the date should be. So actually maybe this scene was so easy I left it for absolutely last. Something happened. I wasn't able to finish my work, so it got reassigned. No big deal. It's only 51 frames, and most likely not something very complicated. So when you look at how to prioritize your scenes, you could, if you wanted to, add a column to try and judge what the difficulty level is. I think just having notes is enough to get an idea. And then when you look at what you take on the hardest scenes first, the longest scenes first, or the longest groups, because it's very efficient to work with scenes in groups when they have the same setup. So all of this stuff here you do in the planning stage when you're looking at the work ahead and trying to figure out what will slow you down and how you can work efficiently with what's been assigned. And then every day you work, right, you fill these up. You add the hours. And again, don't cheat yourself. Use an app, track your hours. And then at the end of the week, right, you have your total hours. And then next to the total hours worked, write down the show you were on with the total amount of frames that you worked. Now, something that helps to see everything at a glance is at the end of the book, on the very last page and working your way back, I like to write the final tally for everything. So I'm not going to bother writing dates here or anything, just because I think you get the idea. And I like to put these little notch lines to show the pay periods. Every studio I've worked for has a bi-weekly pay schedule. So this helps me to know how productive I was in any given pay period. So just to give you an idea, right? Now, if I go back, one thing I forgot to do was, say you're sick, instead of writing down an hour, then you might write down sick or PD, personal day, or, whatever. If you took a vacation day, you might want to write VAC. And then at the back of the book, you could write how many vacation days, or, well, you could write 2 sick. Anyways, identify any days you haven't worked so that you understand at a glance, if your number's low, why is it low? So the question is, what's the point of all this? We've accumulated all this data. What do we do with it? Once you see how much you're animating every week, you can figure out what it is that your time is worth to a company. You can take these numbers and basically figure out an average for the frames per hour. As an example, if we take this one here, I did 606 frames in 35 hours. What's that worth? 17 frames per hour, which typically isn't too bad. And then the other thing you can do is you can use these numbers to set goals. So once you understand what your baseline is, say on average you're doing 450 frames per week at 35 hours per week. I guess another way to write it would be 450 frames for every 35 hours. I feel like this is an easier number to understand, right, than like frames per hour. Now you can set yourself a goal. Maybe you want to do 500 frames per week. When you're measuring something, now you can improve it. So at this point, you can play around, you can experiment with different approaches to your work and see how they affect the number. Now, when you try something new, give it a couple of weeks, 2 to 4 weeks really, to see if this number moves up. Like I said in the previous video, some scenes are harder than others, and some weeks you'll have a more difficult workload than others. It can take a little while, first of all, for new habits to show the results, but also because the work varies, you need a longer amount of time to average it out. Right, so say you're doing 450 or 400 and you're aiming to do 500. Well, once you do 500, what can you do? I like, as a good number, 720 frames per week. Why 720? Well, that basically adds up to 30 seconds if it's 24 frames per second. It's just a nice round number for people to shoot for. This won't be achievable in every project. I do think it's something worth aiming for, but some projects are more difficult than others. But if it's a nice basic show, this is absolutely achievable. There are shows that I've worked on that I would average, I call this HD, an HD amount of frames per week, which is 45 seconds. Now, like I said, it's not every project, but there are some projects that are easy enough that you can hit these numbers and even higher. There's actually a show I worked on. I was averaging 1,200 frames per week. Well, over 1,200. But like I said, a good place to start, really, if you're new, aim for 500 frames of quality animation, low amount of notes, things that get pushed through pretty easily to the product that's being sent to the client. But really, anytime you want to see how you can improve your efficiency, you try things out and then you track these numbers. You see how well you do, how well what you're trying out works out for you. And then you can tweak it and you can see your productivity grow. Or it might go down. You might be trying something out that doesn't work very well. So, you'll know. That's the point. You'll know. So there you go. After you start tracking how well you do every week, and you start setting yourself goals and you find these little tricks and just ways of achieving those goals over time, you see that progress. And I remember how that went for me. Oh, sorry. I only had the budget for 2 flashbacks in this video, so anyways, thanks for watching. I hope it's been useful for you. Animate away. Oh, look at that. It's almost like that, the hair gel scene from Something About Mary. Please try to ignore it.